Greetings, rockers!
From the very beginning, why is this movie on the channel about rock music?
Is it about a band? No, but it is about real fans of rock music.
It's not a documentary, but a lot of what's in it actually happened. Today we have a movie theme. The film I want to talk about and review is not about rock music, but rock has an important place there. A 1990 drama called The Children from the Hotel America. The film was shot in Lithuania, and in Lithuanian it sounds like Vaikai iš Amerikos visbusio. I'm not sure I pronounced it right, sorry. Director Raimundas Banionis. I will warn you right away, this is not a film worth watching for incredible special effects. It is not a high-budget movie. Maybe in places it will even seem boring and titan. But it shows quite accurately what it's like to be different in a totalitarian country, what it sometimes costs to be a rock fan. Because rock, especially in those days, was almost synonymous with the word freedom. Freedom is something that was banned in the USSR, and what a price those who lived in the USSR sometimes had to pay for their views and desires. But here there is a plot that is woven into absolutely real historical events. But everything is in order. So, 1972, Kaunas. The movie begins with an introduction to the main characters. They are all high school students in the city of Kaunas, Lithuania, then Lithuanian Soviet Socialistic Republic. They are also neighbors. The morning begins with the fact that the militia are taking some citizen somewhere, and the grandfather almost drowns in the river because the inflatable boat was punctured. Later we are shown the hideout of the main characters. It's some attic or something like that, where there is a radio on which teenagers try to catch it. Rock and roll through the howling of the Cold War on the waves of Radio Luxembourg. And finally they succeed. The hit The Rolling Stones' I Can Get No Satisfaction starts playing here. Here I want to explain a few points. The obstacles that the signal breaks through are actually artificial. Yes, special jamming stations were placed along the borders of the USSR, which jammed the airwaves with artificial interference. These sound obstacles were called howling of the Cold War. The Soviet authorities used the technology of jamming radio waves from unfriendly countries, and for some Soviet citizens, these radio waves were often the only source of information presented without the filter of Soviet censorship and propaganda. You could also hear trendy music here.
Radio Luxembourg was one of the first in Europe where you could hear rock and roll.
So, young people, listen to Radio Luxembourg and pay attention to the walls. Here you can see inscriptions on the walls, including Slade and the Rolling Stones and Jimi Hendrix, Sweet, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and army helicopters fly over their hideout. Next, Jaggeris. This is the main character, and his friends are already at post office and are writing a letter in English to Radio Luxembourg. They write who they are and where they are from. They ask to air new songs of their favorite bands. Next comes a bit of ordinary everyday reality. At one point, the main character awakens to youthful lust, because of what he gets hit from his not girlfriend. Electricity is restored and new residents appear in the house, including a young girl, Rina. They get to know Jaggeris. The next day, Jageris goes to the church, where his older brother is the priest. The latter has some business with the authorities, because ordinary people did not drive such a car. Brother asks to stay out of it. In the church, Jageris and friends have a small part-time job. They clean here for a fee. Friends are fantasizing about the Rolling Stones and animals, when suddenly an acquaintance of theirs arrives with guitar strings. Here I will explain. One of the symbols of life in the USSR was a total shortage of everything. Money was not spared for weapons, and industry produced consumer goods on the residual principle.
People stood in lines for years for a car or furniture. The list of goods in the stores was modest.
Shelves filled with goods could be seen on staged propaganda photos or posters. Rare things were obtained through friends and acquaintances, and their price was therefore higher. Citizens shared with each other if they managed to get something rare. In our case, these are guitar strings. The other day there is a concert must be in town, and Jageris needs some guitar strings. He wants to perform at that concert. An acquaintance asks for 10 rubles, which is a lot for a schoolboy, so he takes money from his brother's table. He plans to work them off by cleaning the temple later. Evening. Our heroes are waiting for their prey, a telephone handset from a street payphone. The first attempt to rob the payphone turns out to be a bit unsuccessful, and Jageris injures himself a little. But then there is a second attempt, and finally he has the trophy. You're probably thinking, what the hell did a kid steal a handset from a street payphone at night? Everything is simple, as in the case of strings. Deficit. In his refuge, Jageris makes an electric guitar with his own hands, because an electric guitar is both rare and expensive. That is, you can't buy it just like that. So he is tinkering, and for an electric guitar, you need also, among other things, a pickup. They were produced in the USSR, some were imported from the countries of the Warsaw Pact, but again, not enough. When you live in a country with a shortage of almost everything, citizens start to make things with their own hands and share advice among themselves. So, in the Union, there were various magazines and books that had a lot of advice on how to handle shortages on your own. Do it yourself. Tips and instructions. Does your child have no toys? Make your own from acorns, cones and matches. No clothes in the store? Sew it yourself. And once in the Union, there is either a radio broadcast or an article in such a magazine, it's hard to figure out where it first came from, about how to make a pickup with your own hands from a telephone handset. This sparked a wave of theft of handsets from street payphones across the country. Certain elements were either unscrewed from the handsets, or they were completely cut off or torn off. That is exactly what we see in this scene.
The main character steals from a street phone to make an electric guitar.
The guitar is being made little by little, but the thoughts of the main character are not here now, and it seems that their letter never reached Radio Luxembourg. Pheasant suddenly returns. This is a nickname, not his name, but whole film calls him that. He clearly has problems with the law, but he is sure that everything will be fine. Because he is a veteran and he will not be jailed, and he shows this, the road sign Prague 6 km, which means that he most likely took part in Operation Danube. This is when in 1968 the troops of the Warsaw Pact, mainly the USSR, invaded the territory of Czechoslovakia in order to suppress the so-called Prague Spring. The film does not reveal who Pheasant and Jaggeris are to each other, but they live in the same house. Pheasant is interested in whether Jaggeris is a virgin, and after receiving the answer, presents erotic pictures to the joy of the entire male part of their company. Man's attention immediately turns away from working with the guitar. The main character is flipping out and breaks the guitar. Rina suddenly comes to them. The guys welcome her to the America hotel and tell her that they call their house that way because during Free Lithuania, that is until 1940, there was a hotel called America here. And that there was a sign, a restaurant, a fountain and fruit trees, and also that there is a river here. The truth of the latter is no longer there, it is now hidden under the ground and asphalt. The same river that is shown at the beginning of the film, where the grandfather almost drowns. Next, the youth entertain themselves by arranging a spiritual session. They ask the spirits about the freedom of Lithuania and whether Rina will go to the dances with them. This is where Jaggeris has to perform. He never finished his guitar, so at the last moment he borrows a guitar from one of the musicians and after writing Luxembourg on it, he goes on stage. The inscription Rolling Stones on the t-shirt, which was also made by himself. Of course, one could only dream of an official merch. I will explain here. There could be problems in the union for a rock. But if in the park, as here, a small concert is organized with amateur musicians, dancing, there are not many people and the musicians are some local youth,
then everything could go quite calmly.
Several militia officers were monitoring the order here. Their work was order. Ordinary militiamen did not always deal with issues of an ideological nature. And representatives of other law security forces, which were engaged in such matters, rarely attended such small amateur local events. Also, the militiamen, who were often residents of these regions themselves, could simply turn a blind eye and pretend that they did not hear any wrong music. There were also other schemes, for example, lying that you do not play rock. So, if you don't forget about safety and keep a low profile, everything can go smoothly. Officials were not often well versed in musical aspects, so Jaggeris' performance goes well. Backstage, the musicians tell Jaggeris that there is a venue where a performance is planned in the city of Palanga. That there you can bribe the guard with money and play a concert and there should be no problems. Quote, a real Woodstock will turn out maybe. By the way, in this moment, if you listen, you can hear a familiar motif in the background. Yep, that's someone singing none other than the Beatles' Obladi Oblada. Beatlemania broke through even behind the Iron Curtain, but that's another story. School. Suddenly, our heroes are called to the director. The letter they wrote to Radio Luxembourg was intercepted and now they are conducting educational work with them, asking that this should not happen again. Yes, this is a totalitarian country. Can you just write a letter to a foreign radio and hope that no attention will be paid to it? Come on! But of course, it is unpleasant that the letter did not arrive. Jaggeris got angry and wants to write another letter, even if he have to do it himself alone. Friends are afraid of the consequences, and this is logical. While he is thinking about the text of the letter, suddenly he meets Pheasant in a new car. New, of course, in a figurative sense. At the post office, he sees Rina and her mother calling Tel Aviv. Here, too, an explanation is needed. If in the USSR you wanted to call abroad, the scheme was like this.
You came to the post office, ordered a phone call, took a number, waited in line.
Then the employee called you, you went to one of those booths that had a telephone, and they connected you. Jaggeris discreetly escorts the women home. A film about the Second World War is being filmed on one of the streets. The crowd watches, and some man even approaches the director. It seems that this is our grandfather, with a request to do something because they rolled the river under the asphalt. Motivated by the fact that the director is from Moscow, which means he is closer to the authorities. Here he tries to find out if she has someone over there, that is, in Israel, where they called at the post office. Well, he asks if she will go with him to Woodstock and receives a refusal. Scenes of daily life. The people were expelled to demonstrate joy, and Rina's family is collecting things. News arrives that Pheasant has been arrested. More precisely, a letter from him where he writes that they want to imprison him, and in the letter he says to take care of his car. Therefore, the company decides to go to the party on it. By chance they meet Rina, because she was not at home. Without thinking for a long time, she joins the company. Why everything has changed so dramatically in her attitude towards this party, I don't know. But now they are already on their way to the coast of the Baltic Sea. On the way, they again meet a film crew that is engaged in shooting a movie about the Second World War. It's a bit strange to see Rina acting now as if they've been together for a long time. Maybe it's because of her mother? Maybe, I don't know. But it seems that there is no longer a wall between them. On the way, young people accidentally find money that was hidden in the car. This is Pheasant money, and there is a suspicion that it was not honestly earned, given the latter's problems with the law. The young heroes decide to simply put the money back. The city of Palenga on the coast. There is no trace of their friends who were supposed to be here, but there are no hippies anywhere. Friends bypass several places where they were supposed to be. No one is there. But near the stage where the concert was supposed to be, they see a message with a warning that special services are walking around and where exactly to look for a place of a party. They go having previously bought a lot of cough medicine at the pharmacy. This is codeine. Codeine is a cough medicine and an opiate close to morphine. When used in large doses, it causes euphoria like other opiates.
It began to be sold legally in pharmacies of the USSR even before the Second World War.
So, when they go to a party, they buy a means to catch a high. They finally arrived at a small tented camp hidden in the woods. Our heroes finally find their acquaintances and get to a secret forest party of Soviet hippies. Hippies. Yes, their life was not sugar in the USSR, but this subculture did exist here. But unlike the US, they had to hide and survive. They had their own underground cells in different parts of the country, had a clear code of conduct.
Hippies in the USSR were arrested, sometimes sent to mental hospitals, expelled from educational institutions.
This continued until Perestroika. Hippies held underground concerts and secret parties similar to the one shown here in the movie. Here, one of the long-haired says, "People like us are arrested in the city." There is nothing to add here. Young people are just having fun and enjoy themselves as free people. They are all about 18 here on average, and that is not a fact. And they behave like anyone at this age, recklessly. They are high on freedom. At this moment, they are completely free and happy. There is a moment when a helicopter hovers over them. It is not known whether it belongs to the militia or the army, but a group of young people can definitely be seen from it, showing the symbol of peace. Young people drunk of freedom do not hide. In such moments, you can mistakenly decide that you are all-powerful, lose the sense of self-preservation. The helicopter flies away. And the evening continues, and finally they fall asleep in each other's arms. I'm talking about the main characters. But before that, Rina admits that she's actually no longer here. They sold their apartment and now they are waiting for a visa. All that remains is to wait. Maybe they didn't have much time left. She doesn't want to leave. Maybe this is the reason for her behavior now. Right here in the film, what actually sometimes happened to hippies or other representatives of subcultures in the USSR happens. A raid is arranged for them. Yes, it did look like that. I'm not old enough to remember anything like that, of course.
But people whose youth fell on the USSR in the 70s told me about similar raids that happened.
That was unpleasant, but it was so. The militia took everyone to somewhere, registration of detention and forcibly cutting long hair, one of the symbols of belonging to subcultures. Then our heroes are brought to Kaunas, but on the way the little one feels bad. The militia men allow her to go out to buy water. Here, Inga hears a conversation between two women in the store about the fact that someone has committed self-immolation for free Lithuania. In their hometown, they notice that something has happened. There are a lot of militia. Something clearly happened while they were gone. Teenagers are handed over to their parents, for now. Suddenly, a crowd appears on the street chanting Laisvė Lietuvai, that is, freedom for Lithuania. And this is definitely not a Soviet rally. this is a real protest. The father locks Jagaris in the room, realizing that he, with his rebellious character, can now join the protests and thereby destroy his life completely and permanently. This sort of saves the boy, because the Soviet militia quickly restore order in the city with rubber batons and arrests. Here the film shows nothing but Kaunas, spring, or 1972 unrest in Lithuania, real historical events that happened at that time. A few details. On May 14, 1972, 19-year-old student Romas Kalanta committed self-immolation in Kaunas, on the square near the Kaunas State Musical Theatre, as an act of protest against the Soviet regime.
This led to large-scale protests on May 18 and 19, which were suppressed by the militia and the KGB.
A small part of those real historical events is shown in the film. We return to our house. The events in the city must have somehow affected the grandfather, and he digs something out of the ground near the house, and Jagaris is called to the KGB for questioning. Grandpa dies. Okay, I'm not really sure, because nobody specifically says he died here, but it looks a lot like it. And he also put on some clothes similar to a uniform. In his hands you can see a tome with the inscription Hotel America. Of course, there is nothing pleasant about the KGB. Everything is standard. They intimidate, ask whose idea was to gather in the forest. He is reminded that he rode to Luxembourg. He asks about pheasant and for the signe. Which signe? The signe about which the KGBist then pressures Jagaris is columns. There, in the tent city, there was a registration of those who came. And the signe was not simple. This symbol, this is the columns of Gediminas, or pillars of Gediminas. This is a very ancient Lithuanian symbol and its historical coats of arms. Lithuania and not Soviet Lithuania, and of course the Soviet authorities could not like the use of this symbol, because the coat of arms and flag of Soviet Lithuania looked like this. Inquirer also shows him a photo of Romas Kalanta, the same one who committed self-immolation, asking if he knows him. Of course, they did not know each other. Next comes the interrogation with photos. Some of them are those that the youth made in the tent camp. Then the film was taken from them during the raid. The security forces develop those photos. In one of the photos, he is with Rina. Rina's family is waiting for visas. Everything is packed. Of course, she is no longer so inclined towards Jagaris. Quite logical after the story he dragged her into. Here he gives the last idea, which sounds more like a dream, namely to get married so that she will stay. The last hope of a drowning man, and he begins to dream out loud how they could live. But unfortunately, this will not happen. In the church, he lost his temper to his brother priest. He is filled with anger, he is lost in himself. Therefore, he is angry, confused, and does not know what to do. He questions who he is and what is important. In our youth, we often have similar breakdowns when you simply do not know where you are going, who you are, plus the impossibility of being what you want is superimposed on top. and do what you want because of the political regime of the place where you live. When he went to the investigator, he wanted to express him everything, but he kept silent because he was just scared.
In such a situation, there is no shame in being afraid, but it tears from the inside.
The funeral, most likely, it is the grandfather who is buried. Jagiris imagining Kostas, who interrogated him, but it's not him, it's Pheasant who has returned. Pheasant returned and Rina left. He just encounters an empty room. Pheasant arranges a showdown with the young man. He needs his car back, of course with money. The car remained in the forest where there was a tent camp. Inga draws a map where the car is located and its owner rushes to look for it. Then, as in the fog, Jagiris climbs up the ladder and falls down. It's just a nightmare. The house starts to shake. All the residents run outside. This is a river. The same small river that was previously rolled under the asphalt breaks through it. This is the final scene, and what is happening is more likely than the continuation of a dream or some delusion. We see many of our heroes gathered here. Here is grandfather, now his form is clearly visible, and it is most likely a suit. This is the uniform of a hotel employee, most likely a porter. That is, the house once a hotel and the grandfather was its employee. Dream or fantasy keeps moving. Here is the sign Hotel America. Here is Rina, who is no longer here. This is the finale.
Now, some of my thoughts about the movie.
The theme of the river emerges several times throughout the film. I assume, and this is my personal assumption, that this is a metaphor on Lithuania itself. First, free, then occupied, buried and laid asphalt, and then breaks free at last, at the end. In addition, the topic of independent and free Lithuania is raised more than once. The first time is when they write a letter to their favorite radio station. The second time during a spiritual session when they ask the spirits when Lithuania will be free. Laisvė Lietuvai, that is, freedom for Lithuania, chanted by people during protest actions. Well, and the moment with the signa, of course. Historical background. Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union in 1940 and regained its independence in 1990. Accordingly, the Soviet period was a period of occupation when Lithuanians dreamed of freedom, and this is reflected in the film more than once. About that part with a clock. The film shows a close-up of the grandfather's watch as he dies and a close-up of the watch of Romas Kalanta, the young man who set himself on fire. And I thought at first that they should show the same time, but I just can't get a good look at them, although visually the clocks look similar. Maybe there is a meaning or a hidden symbol here, but I can't say for sure. Maybe it's just two clocks and that's all, that stopped because their owners were gone. One more thought came to me when I was almost done with the video. In the Lithuanian language Wikipedia article about this film, the name of the main character, Jagiris, is written in quotation marks. This leads me to thought that this is actually a nickname derived from the surname Jagger. Mick Jagger, lead singer of the Rolling Stones, is meant, and our main character is their big fan, which is shown several times in the film. Jaggeris is a fan of the Rolling Stones, that's why he is Jaggeris. I don't know how correct my guess here is. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems logical. Several times in the film you can hear the word Woodstock. Woodstock. Here they are talking about the legendary festival Woodstock 1969 in the USA.
It was known about even in the USSR, despite all the censorship and blocking of information from there.
There were rumors, some information, and that's why Woodstock was a dream and a real promised land, some kind of a bright image of freedom and music. It was also a dream, because in the Swok, rock festivals, of course, was not held similar to Woodstock. Rock festivals sometimes began to take place here only in the last decade, that is, since the 80s. I will summarize. The film The Children from the Hotel America. The film was shot when Lithuania was regaining its independence. The film was released in 1990 and Lithuania regained independence in 1990.
That is why there are so many themes of freedom here.
It's about high school students who love rock music, but not everything here is so simple and banal. It's about the first love that will leave a mark on you forever, and about farewell. It's about the mistakes you can't help but make when you're young, about recklessness, about dreams, about freedom, as I said. Rock is here as an element of cultural resistance to the system, and one of the things that binds friends together. The system here is a totalitarian regime. And I would like to add this. Rockers from 3 countries who now watch this movie review. Just look at how rock fans from the other side of the Iron Curtain survived at the same time and what price they sometimes paid to feel at least a little bit free. I'm saying goodbye to you today. I hope you found it interesting. You will find a link to the movie in the description of this video.
See you!